Welcome to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy, where Sunday's sermon sparks Wednesday's conversation. Each week, they sit down to dive deeper, reflect thoughtfully, and wrestle with the themes of this week's message. Their goal is to explore faith more fully, ask the hard questions, and invite you into a dialogue that goes beyond the pulpit.
Welcome into the podcast, friends. I'm Pastor Randy Moore.
And I'm Pastor Andy Payton.
Well, if you're from Methodist Temple, our church, then you know who we are, but we always want to be mindful that there could be somebody out there on the World Wide Web.
You never know.
And we want to be welcoming, right?
Absolutely.
And we want to be hospitable. And so I am associate pastor here at Methodist Temple, and Pastor Andy he's the lead pastor. We like to call him the senior pastor, but somehow that doesn't work with our dynamic.
I'm looking more senior all the time.
Tell us a little bit about, I'm going to put you on the spot again, but I know you can answer this.
That's what you always do, Randy. You put me on the spot.
Right.
Yeah.
For those visitors who we want to be hospitable to and welcoming, just a really quick explanation of who we are at Methodist Temple.
Well, at Methodist Temple, in terms of our congregation, our vision, our dream for our church would be that we strive to be a safe and non-judgmental community where people can connect and share their gifts, serve the community, explore what God is doing within their lives. And really what we try to do is create a safe place for people to come and explore their faith. And obviously this podcast is an extension of that,
right.
But we really see ourselves we're very much in line with the United Methodist Wesleyan tradition as well, which is a very inclusive brand of Christianity too. I don't really think we're doing anything new.
Right.
I just think we're living into who we are as
Sure.
a tradition. And so one of the things I'm very passionate about, and I know you are too, is just to be able to articulate and share our tradition with people because we believe it's a very optimistic understanding of the faith.
It truly is good news. And if it's not, then what are we doing here? So it is safe.
Well, one of the things I love to say to my Sunday school class, I've said it in sermons, is that we are inclusive because of our faith. Mm-hmm. We are not inclusive like in spite of it, right? You know, it's because of our faith we're inclusive, not in spite of our faith. And that goes back to Wesley himself, who was famous for saying, even though we may not think alike, we can love alike, right?
Right.
And I think we're trying to just live into that, lean into that in terms of our context we find ourselves in culturally right now.
And if John Wesley is a foreign name to you, he is the founder of the movement called Methodism, which started in England and spread to America. And you might know the numbers, but I just know that the number of Methodists at one point in this country was huge. His influence was huge on America.
By the mid-1800s, Methodism in America, 1 out of 3 people were Methodists.
There you go.
It's an incredible number. If you stop and think about, so if you're walking down the street, 1 out of 3 people you would have met were going to probably be Methodist. Uh-huh. And so many people, of course, don't know that today. And one of the things I think that happens within Christianity today, just by and large in our culture, is folks will kind of lump us all together. Well, the truth of the matter is there's a lot of diversity
Sure.
when it comes to the faith.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to come right at you again today with another one. We always do a soul check-in, and I was thinking about this morning. I thought, as important as that is, and it's very important, and our understanding of soul is not that there's the soul and then there's the body and then there's some sort of separation. The soul is the essence of who we are in the whole. But we want to be careful not to be individualistic, right? I mean, because the individual is important, clearly. Our individual soul is important. But how do we incorporate that into community?
That's a great question. I mean, the way I've described it in the podcast and in my sermons, self-care and soul care are different. Self-care is about replenishing our energy, and soul care is about replenishing our meaning. Mm-hmm. And what meaning is it basically asks the question, who or what am I going to entrust my life to? Mm-hmm. Of course, we would say God, but also we would say a part of what we entrust our lives into is the relationships in our lives. A congregation, our family, our friends, we derive a sense of soul care from those relationships and the quality of those relationships too. Especially, we find ourselves in a season where there's a lot happening within our culture. There's a lot happening within our world. I know there's fear There's anxiety.
Yeah.
So the soul care question becomes very important there because it says, hey, make sure you don't become isolated, right? Like make sure that you stay connected with other people and, lean into those relationships right now. Make sure that you are leaning into them in a sense that you want to make sure that they're healthy and strong, because this is what helps us navigate
As you were
uncertainty.
talking, As you were talking, it occurred to me that the very fact that you might ask me about my soul, my initial reaction might have been none of your business.
Right.
When we can get to the point where it's safe to say, hey, how is it with your soul?
Right. It creates a sense of, it assumes that we can be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Which is a thing that we struggle with nowadays. Men particularly, we struggle. But to be able to even ask that question and then feel safe to answer it honestly is a true gift.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump right into our theme. In September, we've been talking about the stories that shape us. Yeah.
Yeah, I love this theme. I for all the, for the next couple of weeks, we're going to still preach on it and continue it, but we are a narrative people. If you stop and think about it, just look at Jesus. Jesus typically did not get into theological debates with people. What Jesus would typically do is someone would raise a theological type of question, and then he would often respond with a story or a parable. And Jesus, what's he doing here? Well, he's showing us, he's telling us that it's the stories that shape us. Right. It's the stories that we tell ourselves and that we are told and we absorb into ourselves, our consciousness, that influence the people we want to be and the people we want to become. And our lesson this weekend is perfect in terms of that's exactly what happens, right? People are grumbling and Jesus responds with stories. And I know for me, I'm sure it's true for you, you can preach and you can talk about and share all this information with people. But then if you have a great story, that's going to communicate the whole message in a way that hits home, right? Like people feel the message. They feel that story when you're able to share it in a narrative form, because that's who we are.
Because our stories are similar. We're all individual and we're unique, but our stories are similar, and that's why they resonate, I think.
Yeah. We see them. We watch television, we read books, we do all these things. What are we doing? We're absorbing stories. It's not if you're going to have a story, it's what's your story going to be.
Okay, so let's look at a couple of those stories. We're talking about Luke chapter 15, and this is a very famous chapter in the Bible. It's interesting because the common lectionary, those are the set of readings that we use, the mainline church uses week to week, uses these. There are three parables when Jesus is with the tax collectors and the sinners, and they're grumbling about him, the fact that he's associating with them, and so he tells three stories. But the lectionary cuts
it short.
It saves the last one, which is known as the parable of the prodigal son, for another time in the lectionary. Maybe it's next year. I didn't look ahead.
I haven't looked ahead. Yeah. I know it doesn't come in the next few weeks. So,
right. So we've got three parables, but only two of them today. But they're enough. So here we go. This is Luke 15, 1-10. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. "Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my lost sheep.' Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." A couple of stories that have the potential to shape us.
Absolutely. The story behind the story, of course, is those opening lines. Folks are complaining, religious folks are complaining because Jesus is hanging out with people who They're religiously unacceptable.
Right.
I mean, they don't fit the storyline. In that opening, those opening few verses, you see a story on full display. And the story of the religious people that Jesus is responding to is really God's love must be earned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a common story because we live in a world today, for example, where everything is earned. And so it's not a big jump to begin to think, well, God's love must be earned too. I have to do this in order to gain God's approval or behavior. And Jesus is running up against that storyline because he is welcoming people at his table that religiously were deemed as impure or unclean or unacceptable. And so in response, we get these stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting. And you bring up even grandparents, because last week was Grandparents' Sunday, and the stories that are handed down. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what our Bible is, these are stories that are handed down. And in our own lives, there are stories, there are family stories that come down to us and shape us.
Absolutely. I mean, so Grandparents' Sunday was a couple weeks ago, and we talked about the stories our grandparents have shared with us and how they form and shape us. And then in the beginning of my sermon, I also began to talk about, hey, but there's also cultural stories we tell ourselves. And the example I used was like a Little League baseball game. I mean, any of us have been to a Little League baseball game.
More than one.
Yeah. And I mean, we've seen that moment where the parent gets up and starts screaming at the referee or the coach or even their own child. That's another story on full display. Yeah. It's a cultural story, right? Where the storyline is success is everything. And failure is dangerous. Mm-hmm. I mean, gosh, that infects us as a people, right? Mm-hmm. Where, I mean, what if I fail? And if I do fail, it's over, right? I mean, no. Yeah. If the storyline of the gospel is true, that's not the case. And then, of course, a big one right now is the stories that we see in the news. They form and shape us. They form and shape how we see ourselves. They form and shape how we see our neighbors. They form and shape the media and the news stories we tell ourselves. They form and they shape also entire groups of people for us. I mean, we live in this era of cable news and social media where there's the algorithms that form and shape who we are. And of course, last week was a very difficult weekend to preach because, well, it was one of those weeks where we had more violence in the United States, where there was multiple shootings, multiple people lost their lives. Big name that lost, Charlie Kirk, of course, was killed, and people are responding to that right now. And the thing I tried to talk about in my sermon was that it's natural to be angry when there's violence. It's natural for us to think, what's a constructive response to this? Mm-hmm. I mean, we should think that. But the thing we have to also guard ourselves against is our anger can become hatred. And when our anger becomes hatred, if we're not careful, that means that we begin to think, how can I make those people suffer? The people who are responsible for these things, who we think are responsible for these things. In our cultural context today, the people who think differently than me. And Jesus certainly spends a lot of time telling us to guard against those types of things.
Yeah. I want to come back to the news and the stories we pick up on the news and how they shape us, because that's what was my career for 44 years. And so I'm a big proponent of current events and knowing what's going on. But what has happened in our current climate is that we aren't getting the same stories. And it was never perfect, but back when I started and for decades after I had already gotten going in my news career, the goal was to present the news as we saw it unfolding in front of us and report on it without bias. And I can truly say that we did our best to be unbiased. But in our current media culture, media organizations have chosen a point of view that, frankly, that they can monetize. And so now we have these news silos. And so this is contributing to the problem because we're only hearing an echo chamber, so to speak. Whose ever silo you're in, it's a silo. And so how are those two silos how's there ever going to be a bridge to those two silos? It's a huge, huge problem. And so, and I think it's why in the pulpit, we have a responsibility not to be partisan politically, but to address these issues so that there's a better way than violence to respond.
Absolutely. I mean, well, that's what the gospel calls us to, right?
Yeah.
Like to engage people in a relational way, to move beyond the boundaries and the borders.
Yeah.
We live in a world today where we can just sit at home and reinforce our storylines, and we don't even know the name of our neighbor.
Right.
And that's not the gospel, right? That's not the Jesus approach. The Jesus approach that we see in our lesson today is he's sitting down and he's eating with people that are outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever that box is for us, I mean, that's what the gospel challenges us to do, to move beyond the box. And I think what would happen is if we would intentionally engage people in a relational way, move beyond the stories and just, talk to folks, we'll find that we have so much in common typically.
Yeah, you referenced Shane Claiborne, and you weren't the only one that referenced him this week. I saw some of his stuff elsewhere.
Yeah, I saw it on, interestingly enough, social media.
Yeah.
But I think he's a fair person who is dialed into the gospel. Mm-hmm. And he works with the homeless in Philadelphia. I'll never forget the first time I saw Shane Claiborne speak. It was at it was called Ichthus at Asbury College. I was there with my brother, and this hippie-looking guy got up and started preaching, and I was like, who is this? And he's an inspiring leader for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so the stories that shape us, and I was just beginning to make this point. The story that really should shape us is the story of our faith.
Yeah,
and
number one.
What it tells us, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll use a Chesterton quote before we get into the parables themselves. Chesterton, who was a theologian from about 100 years ago or so, he said that a person's religion is not where they go to church. A person's religion is not where they go to worship. Mm-hmm. A person's religion is the cosmos they live inside. Mm-hmm. So it's our worldview.
Yeah.
And so what the faith is supposed to do when it's used properly is it's supposed to challenge our worldviews. And that's exactly, again, what happens here. Jesus has these people grumbling. He begins to tell these stories. The first is of the shepherd. And throughout the Bible, God's often compared to a shepherd. The Lord is our shepherd, the 23rd Psalm. But in this parable, in the context that Jesus would have been telling it, shepherds were suspect.
Right.
In terms of the hearts and the minds of the people. And so Jesus tells this story, though, of a shepherd who has 100 sheep. One of them goes missing. And then he poses the question, who among you would go looking for that sheep? And the answer would be,
none of them.
Nobody. No one's going to leave their 99 sheep to go look for one. Mm-hmm. That's ridiculous. You're exposing the 99 to danger and to harm that could be stolen, or predators can come get them. But that's the point. That's the point of the parable. Jesus is saying, this is how God is. Mm-hmm. God is willing to risk. God is willing to sacrifice. God is going to go looking for that which is lost. Mm-hmm. In this case, the sheep, of course. Right. And then he continues on with the parable of the lost coin. Lady has 10 coins in the story, loses one of them. She looks and looks and looks until she finds it, and then she throws a big party. Well, in my sermon, I'll say it again, but in my sermon I noted parties are expensive. Mm-hmm. And this coin in the parable, we are told it's only worth a day's wage, right?
Right.
So this lady finds a coin and then throws a party that would have cost far more than what that coin would have been worth. Mm-hmm. Again, that's how God is. God is extravagant. God is generous. And so what Jesus is inviting us to do is to see a God and to believe in a God that goes looking for us before we go looking for God, and to see the world through that lens of abundance and grace. And so, it's such a hopeful storyline. It's such a positive and optimistic and graceful way to see the world.
Yeah, you talked about the difference between rules and grace by talking about stories from your family's life and the life of a pastor. I really enjoyed that part of the message.
Yeah, the faith is the faith of the gospel, the faith we see in the gospel, the faith we're given in Jesus is such a hopeful invitation, and yet we get sidetracked. And one of the ways we can know we are sidetracked is that we start to grumble when people are offered grace. Mm-hmm. And then we begin to slip into legalism. And as a pastor's kid and a pastor's grandkid, I have some stories to tell about the church getting stuck in legalism. And just a quick one with my grandfather. This one has had such an impact on me. Back in the day, in the 1970s, he did a wedding ceremony, performed a wedding ceremony for a couple who had been previously married and been divorced. Well, that caused a stir within the life of the church at that time, at least that congregation.
Sure.
And someone showed up in his office with the Bible, ready to quote Bible verses, and they said, we are told, it says right here, we can't do this. And my grandfather responds, he loved to tell this story. He responds with one word, forgiveness.
Yeah.
We are people about grace. And so for him, grace and forgiveness had the final word, not necessarily the rigidity of the rules. And I think that really encompasses really the difference. So to be motivated by grace is to be focused on the quality of our relationships, but to be motivated by legalism is to be motivated by the rules and fear and control of other people.
And your father got in trouble for inviting Santa Claus to church.
Yeah. And which is comical, but it caused the same stir, right? Like my dad had Santa Claus come to a church luncheon years ago, and the same kind of story. Person shows up, says, God told me that we can't have Santa Claus at the church. And my dad responded by saying, well, God hasn't told him or the church council that yet. And again, my dad, he decided to respond with liberty and not rigidity in that moment. And
so it's all about grace and not legalism. Luke 6, you quoted a verse from Luke 6. You said really summarize this.
Yeah, well, legalism is motivated by an idea and a story in which God's love must be earned. Grace is motivated by the idea that God's love is always given. In one of the clearest expressions I can find of that in the Gospels, just a kind of a one-liner, Jesus in Luke 6 says, we are called to be compassionate as our Father is compassionate. Now notice something here. It's a compassion that's already there. We're working with the compassion of God. And the Hebrew word, the Aramaic word Jesus would have used for compassion is really a powerful one because it literally means womb. To be compassionate is to be womb-like a mother's womb. And God is like that according to Jesus. God is life-giving, embracing, nourishing. So God is, so Jesus was, and so we are called to be. And so that really what that does is it sets the stage for us to see what grace is really about. It's not really to have warm and fluffy feelings all the time. Instead, grace is a commitment to do that which is life-giving and embracing and nourishing, even if it means we go against the expectations of our time.
So you asked the question, how do we evaluate success then? And I'll fill in this because I want you to have some time to talk about who the lost ones are. But we tend to, or at least there's a risk that we are going to evaluate success by the numbers or by the letters, you call them the ABCs, attendance, building, and cash. And we're all guilty of that. And there is a proper place for all of those.
It's not that these are not important, but it's not the heart of it, right? So, yeah.
And the lost sheep, who are the lost folks?
Yeah, I think that's the major question the church needs to be asking. Who are the lost ones in our lives and in our context? And I mentioned the elderly. Often they get forgotten when it comes to the life of the church, but also just society in general. Sometimes we can forget about the elderly. I talked about, the shooters, right? We've had multiple mass shootings over the course of the last, it goes way back to even the 1990s, really. Sure. We've had mass shooting after mass shooting, and overwhelmingly the shooters are young white men. And that's a group, I think, that they represent lost ones.
Right.
White men particularly, for whatever reason. We've become isolated, and then we go online to find our sense of belonging. We then become radicalized. That can lead to some of these acts of violence. And so we, the church, should be thinking about how do we connect with some of the young men in our context. And then finally, children. In the state of Indiana, one of the things that we have at the Methodist Temple here is a daycare, but in the state of Indiana, the vouchers for kids going into daycare, the funding has been cut significantly in the past year, which means that there's a lot of children that need to go to daycare, but they can't go because the funding's been cut. And so I think that's a group of folks that would qualify for the lost ones, right? I mean, they're being left behind. And the question the church should be asking is, how do we respond to those kinds of situations? I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, that's tough news, but it can also be an opportunity in terms of for us to reach out and to model God's presence for other people.
And your challenge was to identify the lost ones in your own life.
Yeah.
And
Not just from the church level or congregational level, but who in our individual lives have gone missing. And as the week has progressed, I've had a couple of people approach me with stories of folks that they've reached out to and that they've lost contact with. And they were just in tears in terms of like how it felt to reconnect to people. Yeah. And Jesus is right. There is rejoicing, right? When there's a reconnection, there's always rejoicing. And why? Because we are primarily and foundationally a relational species and a relational people.
Mm-hmm. So if Grace had the final word, how different would our story be? You left the congregation to reflect on that. I'll be back in the pulpit on Sunday. And a couple of weeks ago when I preached, I made the comment that sometimes Jesus is clear, but sometimes what he says is difficult. And now I'm paying for it because the text next week is the parable of the dishonest manager. Ooh. And so Jesus actually, it seems like he's commending someone for something that people generally aren't commended for.
Shrewd.
Yeah. So we're gonna unwrap that. I don't know how well we'll unwrap it, but we will wrestle with it. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the fun of it. I used to be a person that wanted it in black and white. Tell me what it says and tell me what it says clearly. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. And I've come to really appreciate the journey and the wrestling. So we'll do some of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening and now watching our podcast. We appreciate it. I want you to know that if you continue to only watch the podcast or only worship with it virtually, that's cool. That's great. But if you'd like to join us here, if you're local and you don't have a church home, come see us at the Methodist Temple. In the meantime, we hope you have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. We hope you'll join us next week. We see Christ in you.